Thanks for coming back to listening to Stay on Topic, weekly podcast with three over-the-hill guys with nothing better to do on a Sunday. We're joined by Bob Ricotta, who has worked in education, news, marketing, PR, and all-around good guy. How you doing, Bob?
Pretty good, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'm looking forward to today's topics.
James Post, the godfather of Stay on Topic, who's been itching to do this for about 3 years, finally getting it off the ground. He covers crime and politics for the leader in Corning, New York. James, how's it going this week?
I'm doing good. I'm raring to go on these topics. It's been a busy week.
In a bit of a new format. It's not that outside the box of what we were doing, but a refined format, let's call it, this week.
Yes.
And to start things off, Bob Ricotta has really had his finger on the pulse of what's gone down with the American Health Care Act, or how it didn't go down.
Well, first of all, just for simplicity's sake, I'm going to refer to them as Trump Care and Obamacare, just because I get the acronyms mixed up and which is the Affordable Care Act and the American Health Care. Trump Care, Obamacare. That's what I'm going to call them.
Yeah, and probably easier for the listeners to figure out what you're talking about as well.
So, I mean, things went down to the wire. Things were really interesting in Washington this week. I found it very interesting that Democrats were celebrating as if they had anything to do with the defeat of Trump Care. Yeah. They were high-fiving and popping champagne corks when, maybe there was something to do, maybe the pressure that constituents put on their congressmen and women had something to do with it, but the Democrats played almost no part in this defeat.
No, and the constituency was pretty divided between left and right in terms of not wanting to lose their health care.
It's so interesting to watch a party that's been out of power for 7 years try to govern. It's so much easier to be against something than it is to be for something. And I think the GOP suffered from having a big tent and found that you can't make your conservative wing happy without losing your moderates and vice versa. The way I understood, I believe it was in Vox or 538.com, there were 4 different groups that opposed Trump Care. There was the Freedom Caucus. There was a congressman from districts that Hillary won but elected Republican congressmen. There's a few of those. And then there's what's called the Tuesday group, which are the moderates. Yes, there are a few moderate Republicans left in Congress, although it's amazing what they consider moderate nowadays. If these guys are moderates, then Amory Houghton would be downright liberal by their standards. And then there were just mavericks who just kind of do their own thing. But one of the congressmen who was in on the negotiations said that if this thing is going to pass, it's going to pass by 2 votes. If it's going to go down, it's going to go down by 40. So it was just wild. It was a wild ride. As late as Friday morning, it looked like Trump may have been able to pull it off, but he just couldn't corral everybody. I'd like to hear your thoughts on whether you think now, and I know it is less than 100 days into the Trump presidency, but in 6 months, could we be looking at this as the beginning of the end of the Trump presidency?
Oddly enough, I'm not sure how much of this at this point reflects on Trump. Certainly, the moderates fleeing this bill, that was a result of what the bill is. But the biggest roadblock that Trump ran into, that he kept running into again and again, like he thought he was going to move it, was the Freedom Caucus. And the Freedom Caucus doesn't really have a problem with Trump. They have a problem with Paul Ryan. They wanted to stick it to him, and this was their opportunity. So a lot of that's carried over from the previous administration. So I don't know if this is indicative of what will happen on future bills. I'm not saying it's going to be any easier to wrangle those people, but certainly I think in the case of that particular constituency, I think it wasn't so much a reaction to Trump's lack of leadership. I think these were people who just don't like the leadership of their own party.
I guess the way I look at it is it's a very uneasy alliance between Trump and the House Republicans. I'm wondering if this will embolden people who aren't a natural fit with the Trump agenda to not toe the line and to start walking away, especially if they are in districts where Hillary won or was close to winning.
Yeah.
They may start seeing cracks in Trump's armor and start being their own person. Chris, what say you?
What I found really funny is how Trump has now divided his own party into loyalists and non-loyalists. And he's making a big deal about the Republicans that weren't loyal to the bill. And it's, well, what are you going to do? What's the downside here?
Yeah, I mean, is he going to look for district attorneys to primary these people?
Yeah.
Set up something in the town square with bunting and a band? And
I don't think he's smart enough for that. I don't think that would even occur to him because he knows so little.
And he doesn't have the political infrastructure.
No.
He doesn't have the weight of despite having Reince Priebus there in the West Wing with him, he doesn't have the swing with the the Republican National Committee to actually be bringing in his own candidates, to go after these people. That's not his thing.
And I'm glad you brought up Mr. Priebus because from what I've heard, my sources, well, actually it's CNN sources, but the knives are really out for Rance. He wasn't the most popular guy in the White House before this. The report said that he was the one that persuaded Donald Trump to go with healthcare first and not something more manageable like tax reform.
Yeah.
So
the idea that tax reform is going to be more manageable, I think, is going to be a subject for debate. Well, maybe as early as next week's podcast.
It's an easier sell, at least, I think.
Yeah, and across the board between left and right, I would think that'd be a much easier sell.
But these are people who seem to not realize in putting together a healthcare bill that there were going to be winners and losers, and there were going to be constituencies like the AARP who are going to be after them, and that's only going to be more complicated on tax reform. And all of the people who are going to be for or against them because of certain provisions are going to be the big people who they rely on for fundraising. There's gonna have to be a lot of deal making, and I'm not sure they're prepared for that.
And here's my question. The Republican Party had 7 years in which to craft an alternative to Obamacare. Why did they bungle it so badly? Why was this such a disaster? I mean, couldn't they have had something ready for week one?
I suppose I just don't know the answer to that. I think at some level they were convinced that this should be easy. I think they had talked so much about the flaws in Obamacare that they were convinced that just fixing those flaws as they saw them would create a coherent healthcare system for the United States. And you can't rearrange, a sixth or a third of, depending on how you calculate, of the U.S. economy by not spending the amount of time that the Democrats spent crafting Obamacare, which was months of wrangling and dealing with interest groups
and hearings.
and hearings where people actually talked about the bill, and getting insurers on board and getting interest groups on board. None of that was done here. And I don't know if it's inexperience. I don't know if it's hubris. It could be both.
It seems like Republicans aren't ready for prime time. It seems like they're not ready to govern. They should have had something in their pocket, tested, and ready to run. They had nothing. It seems like they cobbled this, like they were they were surprised that they'd won, and they're like, oh, we got to put something together. This is what we ran on, and this is what they came up with. I don't get how they were so unprepared to govern, at least on this issue.
Well, and I think part of it was the realization that repeal was not going to fix the problem. That they were actually, after talking about repeal and replace for so long, that replace part was going to come on them, and it couldn't be done later because Obamacare had become so central to the infrastructure of American healthcare over the last 7 years that they actually had to have a functional replacement, and that had to be done at the same time as repeal. And they weren't willing to wait because of all the promises they made about repeal. And I think that's part of what led to the rush.
And that kind of dovetails into my next question. Is this a blessing in disguise that it failed so quickly? Because in our ADD society, are Americans going to remember this in 3 months when now we're talking about tax reform or infrastructure or another big topic? The fact that healthcare was only a thing for 2 weeks may be a blessing to the GOP because it didn't grab the national attention and hold on to it for months like Obamacare did.
It could be a blessing. It depends on what the next storyline is. If the next storyline is tax reform and that becomes a boondoggle and they are struggling to get their own members together and they're not sure what they want, then it just feeds into a larger story.
Okay.
It goes into the loss column. And if that loss column keeps getting bigger, then that's one of the things they're always going to throw back.
And that goes back to my original question. You know, if the losses keep piling up, we could see Donald Trump as a lame duck president by August. We all know that people are already starting to get ready for the 2018 midterms. I mean, that's just a fact of life in politics. You have like 6 weeks to govern and then you're already campaigning again. So people are going to have to return to their districts. People like our Congressman Tom Reed, who was always in favor of this. So he's got this around his neck twice because he was always in favor of it and it failed. So he can't even cling to the fact that it didn't pass because he was on record strongly in favor of it.
But that brings up another issue, which is how he came to be in favor of it. And what's come to be called the Buffalo buyout.
Okay.
The agreement mostly spearheaded by Chris Collins from the 27th district up towards Buffalo. Doesn't really include Buffalo, but Buffalo buyout rhymes, so that's what Democrats came up with. And this deal that was struck for this manager's amendment as part of the Trump Care, the American Health Care Act, that basically takes upstate New York counties off the hook for Medicaid spending. Tom Reed was sort of a fence sitter on this bill. He talked a lot about his concerns about certain parts of it. Most people considered him a likely yes vote, but he wasn't a strong supporter. Last Tuesday, he put out a press release announcing his intent to vote for the bill. And part of the reasoning that he presented was this deal on Medicaid, which applied only to upstate counties in New York, which is the sort of deal making. I guess the sort of deal making we haven't seen since Obamacare with the Cornhusker kickback and things like that. You know, for listeners who don't know, Medicaid spending for counties in upstate New York is a big deal. For many of them, their share of Medicaid takes up their entire tax levy. And there are always people talking about, you know, if we could just get, you know, the state to take on the full cost of Medicaid, then it would really free up our budgets, which is true from their perspective. I've never thought that the state of New York would be willing to give up on the level of Medicaid services that they provide, and therefore those taxes would just become part of state income taxes.
I guess I don't understand how that wasn't that just moving
It is
money around.
from the perspective of a taxpayer. It is just moving money around. From the perspective of a county administrator, it's a budget that you now have control over, which is what they want.
Okay.
So obviously, this is something that appeals to upstate Republicans like Collins and Reed, and that was a deal that was made to get basically the New York Republican congressional group on board.
Also surprised me in the run-up to the vote that didn't happen was Republicans, and when I say Republicans, I mean the lawmakers, not
Rank and file.
registered. That's who I'm talking about. But Republican lawmakers were basically coming out and saying, yeah, we know it could really screw over a lot of people, but, maybe don't buy an iPhone.
Yeah.
And it just...
Tone deaf.
There's this level of disdain that they seem to have that they are just not afraid to put out there anymore.
And I hate to pin that on all Republicans. Certainly we've heard that from a lot of them. But, Jason Chaffetz, who's the one who's stuck with that clip from CNN or Fox or wherever that was, not the most mainstream member of the party. And I'm pretty sure other Republicans cringed when they heard that quote. Maybe they didn't want to hear it out loud. Maybe they feel the same way, but...
They cringe, but we don't know what they really believe. And when Chaffetz goes on a national broadcast and says something like that, that just taints the entire party. And it doesn't stop there. There's also this idea of you can't rebuild America if we keep letting people from other nations in. That was gaining a lot of momentum until the Trump care debacle happened. You had Steve King from Iowa who said, we can't rebuild America with other people's babies. And and that was on Twitter. CNN asked him to clarify, did you misspeak? He's like, nope, that's how I feel. And he just let her rip. And he wasn't the only one. Newt Gingrich, who obviously doesn't make law anymore, but is still very much in the Republican think tank, it told Fox News that he wants everyone to assimilate to being in an American civilization. We absorb lots of people from lots of places. We can do it again, but part of that requires to defeat this left-wing mythology that you can be multicultural and still be a single country. These kind of ideas, they're just not afraid to put out there anymore. And I don't know if it's because they're emboldened by the last election and they think, oh, these are actually popular ideas. We don't have to do dog whistles anymore.
Yeah.
I read a study recently that, and it shouldn't be surprising, the more exposed you are to other cultures, the more tolerant of them you are, which is why big cities traditionally vote blue. And if you grew up in Iowa and don't know any Muslims or Mexicans, you're very much more likely to be a Republican and more likely to be
xenophobic.
There we go. if we want to call it that, sure. So it shouldn't be surprising that in an election where a man who was misogynist, racist, and made fun of disabled
openly, no dog whistles, no nothing,
no.
And
then tried to gaslight us and say it didn't happen.
Yeah.
It's not surprising that the people who feel that way naturally are emboldened enough to come out from behind the fridge and say that publicly. I still feel that sunlight is the best antiseptic, and I feel like people are seeing and not every Republican is racist.
No.
And not every racist is a Republican. But it just seems like this election has brought out the worst in the Republican Party.
It really does. And just it blows me away that they're willing to just say it now. No coded messages, no written to appeal to racists without sounding racist. They're just coming out and saying it. And it's staggering to me that anybody with that position would do that.
They're gonna be members of the party who are going to be like that. But, going back to, what we were just talking about with, the midterms coming up, in political terms soon. If there's a series of defeats for the Trump agenda, how many Republican members of Congress are going to be running away from Trump in 2018?
Well, let's look. It's not even the first 100 days yet, and Trump's top legislative agenda has been defeated. He's upside down in his approval ratings. He's being investigated by a congressional committee and the FBI. I don't know when people are going to start running for cover, but it's got to be. He needs a win. He needs a win. If he thinks that tax reform is his win, I think he's miscalculated this. I think he needs to go for infrastructure.
Yeah, I've said that should have been his day one priority.
And I think that's what he wanted to be his day one priority. But
with
he was being pushed too hard.
Would the Freedom Caucus let him go for infrastructure? I mean, that's spending. That's government spending.
In a way, I think that's one way in which Trump's instinct was better than that of other people in the party, because I think infrastructure could have gotten Democratic votes.
It could have gotten Democratic votes. And more importantly for Trump, voters would have seen him making jobs. All these jobs that he's announced were not his doing. They were all things that were planned years ago. This could have been his jobs bill, infrastructure. Yeah. And he could have gotten a lot of voters on his side, or anybody who was kind of in the middle or uncomfortable. Be like, oh, he's making jobs. He's building stuff like he said he would.
He's fixing bridges. He's fixing airports.
Exactly. It's beyond me why they didn't just start with that, because to get in people's good graces, to open some doors down the road.
They ran on repealing Obamacare. They ran on it. They promised. They made so many promises that would be their top priority. They had to make good. But yeah, a jobs bill, an infrastructure bill, that's a no-brainer. They could have gotten Democratic support. Now, Democrats, I think, see weakness. I don't know if they can get. I don't know if the Trump administration can get Democratic support on anything, because they've got him on the ground. They want to put a boot on his throat.
Yeah, and especially the extent to which he and his team demonstrated through the healthcare bill how much they don't understand the process. And the most obvious part of that was those 2 hours on Friday afternoon where it appeared from all reliable reporting that Ryan knew he didn't have the votes and Trump was telling him to hold the vote anyway.
I think in his mind, he wanted the no votes to be named. He wanted every member of Congress to take a stand, yes or no, so that he could go out and shame the no's. This way, we don't know how many no's there were. Nobody had to take a stand. Could have been 4, could have been 40.
But nobody outside of their districts knows who those people are. It's still Trump's failure. And I think it would have been a bigger failure, more memorable failure, if they had actually held the vote and actually lost.
This wasn't a Trump failure. This was a Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer failure. Didn't you read his tweets?
Or according to them, their victory.
And he can spin it any way he wants. I don't think anyone's buying it.
So if I were whispering in Trump's ear going forward, Trump is not a natural conservative. He is a populist.
Yeah.
He may, if he's going to win, if he's going to get out from under this, he may have to turn his back on the Freedom Caucus and look to pick off conservative Democrats. Look at districts that he won in that are held by Democrats and form some kind of governing coalition with conservative Democrats. I think that's his path forward right now.
And it's possible to see, even, beyond just cutting out the Freedom Caucus, if he moves toward a more populist agenda that focuses more on things like infrastructure, it's possible that there could be a coalition of moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans. And I'm not sure what that looks like. It's not something we've seen in decades.
Yeah.
But that depends a lot on Trump's leadership, and I'm not sure it's leadership he's demonstrated the ability to bring.
No, it's all about the art of the deal for him.
Which kind of takes us to his budget. All the deals he planned to roll out and how that was presented to people.
And the budget is interesting. As, any president's budget proposal is going to get news coverage. Obviously, this one got a lot. Just the top line things, the 31% cut for the EPA budget, 28% from state, which seems strange, 18% from HHS, which would include massive cuts at the National Institute of Health, which I don't think most Republicans even support. Those are the people who are going to keep us all from getting Zika. But fundamentally, this isn't a governing document. The president's budget is a set of priorities that, in a best case scenario, gets translated by the leaders of his party in Congress into legislative language and lives or dies based on the votes that it can get in Congress. And it's a process that takes a long time. But what we've been hearing for the last week and a half is from very local media all the way up to The Atlantic, talking about what the impacts of Trump's budget would be, and seems to me wasting a lot of ink and airtime on it. Just a quick search, local impact stories in the last week in the Daytona Beach News Journal, the Weirton, West Virginia Daily Times, the Wilmington, North Carolina Star News, Naples, Florida Daily News, and my own Corning Leader.
Wait a minute, I haven't read the Naples paper yet, so don't spoil it for me.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
All talking about impacts on things. The thing that seems to have drawn the most attention, because I think it's the easiest for people to grasp, and it's actually what ran in a recent paper, which I'm the assistant editor of, is the impact on Meals on Wheels, which comes through, a lot of their funding comes through community development block grants. Not a big part of what $3 billion in community development block grants actually go to. In this area alone, it goes to sewer funding, water system funding, things like that. A lot of infrastructure that wouldn't otherwise get funded. And it's...
But Meals on Wheels is sexy, and not just in a Golden Girls kind of way. It's something that people can understand. And, I've got to give the Democrats credit. They stayed on message, and they really put this budget front and center and stayed focused on it.
Do you think that's what's driving the media coverage, though, at local newspapers in small towns?
No, but
we're all lefties. We know that.
If the Democrats keep harping on it, putting grandma and grandpa out there saying these people are going to lose their Meals on Wheels, that's what the media has to pay attention to. The way I look at the Trump budget, I look at any president's budget as a mission statement. It is a statement of purpose. This is a statement of beliefs. Here are my priorities. You're right. It means nothing, but it shows us what's in the president's mind.
That's true, but I'm not sure how many people are surprised by what's in the president's mind when it comes to his funding priorities. But the real question is, are any of those funding priorities actually going to be realized? And I just don't see it happening. the budget process is something that so many people don't understand. And a lot of people, including some who've been in Congress for a few terms now, don't remember.
Sure, it's been continuing resolutions, hasn't it?
The last time that all 12 appropriations bills were passed out of the 12 appropriations subcommittees, passed in the House, passed in the Senate, and signed by the president. Anyone want to guess what year that was?
81.
I'll go 2002.
1997. 1997 fiscal year. So
Bill Clinton.
96 under Clinton.
Bill Clinton. Best president of my lifetime.
In the last 40 years, that full process has only happened 4 times.
Wow.
I believe 81 was one of the previous times, actually.
I was going to say it had to have been.
A lot of partial appropriations, and then continuing resolutions on other parts of the budget. A lot of, omnibus bills thrown in at the last minute that bundle, 6 appropes bills together. But as far as the actual hard work of putting together a budget that actually reflects a coherent worldview for what the government should be doing from top to bottom hasn't happened since 1997.
Well, then here's a larger question for you. Considering that staggering statistic that you just dropped on us, is the process broken? Does the process need to be revamped? I mean, that's not how government was meant to work.
I don't think it was ever prepared to operate in the climate that we're in right now.
Yeah, but we weren't in this climate in 1983, 84, 85, and
No, that's what I'm saying. It's the last time it happened was 97. And to me, that's when things really started to get, that's where the cracks started showing in this bipartisan, awful disaster that we're in now. And a lot of it, thanks to Newt Gingrich. And it just kept, getting worse, certainly through the Bush years and the Obama years. And now you have bipartisanship within parties. The Democrats are just really upset with Bernie and his supporters. The Republicans have 3 or 4 different parties within the Republican Party. It's really strange days, and I don't think that it was ever...
I mean, that's where the horse trading comes in. That's where,
right.
I'll give you a bridge for your district if you vote for the Planned Parenthood funding.
Mm-hmm.
That's where the horse trading comes in. But
now they don't do it just on principle.
Right.
And that's what I don't think the system was built for.
But, horse trading is necessary to the budget process. And, not to get too far into the weeds, but, I talked about 12 appropriations bills. Those come out of 12 appropriations subcommittees. And all of those subcommittees have chairmen who have their own interests. And in some cases, in the current situation, chairmen whose interests conflict with what Trump's budget would be. Just, to name one specific case, the subcommittee that is going to be responsible if this budget goes forward for making the massive cuts to the Department of Energy that Trump wants is chaired by a guy who has a huge Department of Energy lab in his district. So where does that go? And these are the kinds of considerations that it seems like the Trump team just don't ever even look at before they speak.
No, they don't understand. And we talked about it before on this podcast, how, Reince Priebus was kind of installed
as the adult.
Yeah. To be the voice of reason amongst a bunch of insane people. And the insane have completely drowned him out.
I think Donald Trump sees himself as a master negotiator. To me, he reminds me of a 10th grader who's negotiating with 8th graders. So he may be good in context, but against his peers, he's not that good. But I think in his mind, this budget, and I did the air quotes around budget, this budget that he put out, I think he thought he'll lead with an absolutely horrible budget so that when the House comes out with their real budget, it looks sane by comparison.
I don't think he's that smart. You're giving him way too much credit.
Yeah.
That is exactly the kind of negotiation you lead with a bad deal. That's exact. I mean, I'm sure it's one of the chapters in his book.
But I think that goes back to something that I think we've talked about before, is whether business acumen actually, well, we're far from the first people to talk about it, whether that business acumen that Trump supposedly has actually translates into the ability to govern. And deal making is all about understanding the relative value of what you're giving someone in exchange for what they're giving you. And I don't think he understands the political system enough to make those judgments. And I think that was incredibly clear on the healthcare bill when he kept trying to make deals with the Freedom Caucus, deals that, getting down to the last minute, being willing to cut deals that would basically gut the whole bill, trying to get those votes, and not realizing that that's not what they wanted, that didn't have any value to them, that a win had value to them.
But your statement kind of presupposes that Trump is self-aware enough to know his own weaknesses. And I don't believe that's true. I think he thinks that he's a master tactician, and this was a smart way to start the deal-making process on the budget, is to put out a horror show of a budget, and then there's nowhere to go but up.
But what do we think then? Because we seem to have sort of contradicted ourselves. Does this reflect his real priorities, or is this a negotiating position?
I stand by. I don't think he's smart enough to do that.
So you think this is his
I think this is what his cabinet has put together for him, with enough of his ideas to make him feel like a big boy.
I can see that happening. I think that the nature of the budget shows his priorities. The numbers are just smoke and mirrors, but where the cuts are coming from indicate what he values and what he doesn't.
But this is a guy who's talked about the need to modernize our nuclear arsenal, who wants to gut the Department of Energy.
Yeah.
Who does he think would be in charge of modernizing our nuclear arsenal?
Well, that's why he got Rick Perry to help him out with these tough issues.
I've got nothing to that.
Yeah.
So as far as the budget goes, I mean, the position we're in now is the position that we've been in for years. The government is currently funded under a continuing resolution. It runs out April 28th. And setting aside that fast approaching deadline, there actually specific internal documents that I took a few looks at, not secret internal documents, things that are published online.
That'd be kind of badass, James.
That agencies have for how to deal under how to work under a continuing resolution, and it's not the normal order of things. It's not, they constantly have to go to the OMB, the Office of Management and Budget, for anything that's considered out of the ordinary spending. Any department has to do that under a continuing resolution. And for how long have we been operating under continuing resolutions? They have to justify every bit of their spending. They have more documentation to do than they would normally have to do if they were operating under a regular budget. So this is, it's already a problem for the people who are actually working in those departments. And the reality is that up against an April 28th end of funding for the federal government, and the question of whether we end up with another shutdown, and the other reality that passing an actual budget, well, to begin with, writing an actual budget will take months.
I was going to say, it takes more than 30 days to do that usually.
The committee process takes months. The writing process usually starts the year before.
So it's clear we're going to have another CR.
We're going to end up with another CR. And we're probably going to end up with another CR funding through the end of the year because that's just what we do now, and no one knows any other way.
And so staying on topic, maybe the media overblew it a little.
Just a little.
Okay.
So my question is anything going to get done between now and April 28th, or is everyone's attention going to be drawn to this government shutdown and the CR to keep the government running? So are we looking at nothing, no wins for the Trump administration through at least Easter?
That's a fair question, and I'm not sure how they're going to prioritize that. If the leadership thinks that they're going to end up with a CR anyway, then there's no cost at this point to moving on to something like tax reform. We'll just pass a CR and be done with it. And
this is just my ignorance. A CR can be passed along party lines, right? That's just a simple majority.
Well, and a continuing resolution at current funding levels, or that's the sort of inflexibility of a continuing resolution, is there's not a lot of specific changes that you can make in a continuing resolution. Other than you can do sort of overall cuts or cuts based on formula if you want to cut the budget. But you can't go hacking and slashing at particular departments in a continuing resolution.
So a CR
if for no other reason than because it puts you back in the same position that you would be trying to vote on a full budget.
Got it. So a CR should be easy then, which is what you're saying.
It's the best case scenario for Democrats, especially if it's close to full funding from last year's budget anyway.
So smelling blood in the water, can the Democrats take advantage of the Republican situation, and can they leverage this possible government shutdown to really stick it to Trump and the Republicans?
I don't know to what extent they can do that without putting themselves in the position of potentially being blamed if a shutdown happens.
Sure. I mean, Republicans were blamed for how many years playing politics with the budget and the government? Yeah, I can definitely see flipping the script and blaming the Democrats for closing down the Smithsonian and such.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering if there are some strategic minds in the Democratic Party. I think I already know the answer to that. But I'm wondering if they can leverage this somehow. I mean, Trump is vulnerable. Trump is weak. This may be they can put in a kill shot before June.
Steny Hoyer was asked this by Wolf Blitzer on Friday when the ACH or Trump Care was no voted, and Wolf Blitzer asked him, "So, what's the Democratic plan now? Are you going to try to talk to some people?" And Hoyer's just like, "Oh no, we're just going to let this play out." It's like, yep, Democrats. That's why you keep losing things. They're not proactive about anything.
But I don't know. I can see both sides. I can see how to win anything that they need their constituents, and particularly the people who didn't show up to vote in November, to see them doing something proactive.
The real reason why we're in the mess we're in now.
But at the same time, I understand the instinct to stand back and watch the Republicans implode.
I mean, so far they've done a great job,
and not put themselves in a position where any of this is their fault.
But to not take advantage of the situation in some way somehow is
but
so
in what way?
Maybe taking advantage of it means not doing a thing and letting Republicans hoist themselves on their own petard.
What Blitzer was trying to ask.
If I was in charge of the Democratic Party right now, I would have Chuck Schumer chained up in a closet.
Gagged.
In
Yes.
a gimp suit.
Because every time somebody like him or Nancy Pelosi takes a victory lap,
Yep.
all it does is delay the time when those Trump supporters who maybe didn't support the racist dog whistles, maybe or just whistles, maybe didn't support the anti-immigration stuff, but liked the populism, liked the focus on jobs, liked the focus on middle America. Anytime those Democrats that those people hate come out and say, hey, look what we did, it's delaying the time when those people start turning away from Trump.
I can see that.
So what'd you guys do fun and interesting last week? Anything?
I worked 75 hours, so not much.
Okay. James, anything fun and or interesting?
I'm not sure I'd call it fun. So Friday night, and we're speaking to you from Sunday, March 26th right now. Friday night, there was a broadcast of Dateline NBC about the murder of a local woman named Kelly Clayton, which was a huge story around here for good reason. And I had difficulty watching the entire episode. This was an incredibly complex case, as evidenced by the fact that when I covered the trial of the instigator of this murder, Kelly's husband, Thomas Clayton, it took 8 weeks, which is very long for a trial in rural upstate New York.
How many witnesses?
84.
Okay.
Oh my God.
Yeah. So obviously you can condense that into an hour.
Of course.
43 minutes with commercials.
Dateline didn't even touch on the trial, which I understand, but they tried to, and I understand it's their business for that program in particular to create drama and not necessarily to do the capital N news. But they focused a lot on one particular woman who had allowed the now convicted killer, Thomas Clayton, to borrow her phone to make a phone call. And it turned out that phone call was to the hitman in this case, Michael Beard. And she looked up her phone records. She went to police with this information. And that sort of led them back to Michael Beard, who they'd already interviewed once, but hadn't necessarily considered a prime suspect at that point. And they turned that into the turning point in the case. Michael Beard, a few days after that, confessed. And although he did go to trial and argued that he had given a false confession, he recanted his confession, he was convicted pretty easily. I mean, at that point, he had confessed on the record twice and had in effect confessed by giving grand jury testimony against Thomas Clayton, which was also on the record. These were all things that were available to the jury in his case. But connecting him to Thomas Clayton was much harder. And it took the hard work of a lot of people who didn't appear on my television Friday night. And I think that was what was so frustrating to me.
So let me ask you this. Could the story have been told in an hour and told right? Or was it just not tellable in the time that they had?
I'm not convinced that it was tellable in a thorough way in an hour. I would have liked to have seen a nod to the complexity of the case the prosecution had to put together. And they sort of left people with the impression that this was solved once they had that phone call between Thomas Clayton and Michael Beard. And as somebody who had, a lot of interest in this, having covered both trials and, having covered the case off and on since the original killing, which was in September 2015, I was actually following, for those who are familiar with Dateline, they have a hashtag Dateline discussion that they try and create on Twitter, and they will have a little chyron where they will ask specific questions as they go to commercial break for discussion on Twitter. And I'm following this discussion, and a lot of people are left feeling as though this was not a strong case against Thomas Clayton. And I found myself, because I'm that guy, answering a lot of people's questions about the case on Twitter. But this was a case that mostly revolved around extracted cell phone data and using that and data from Google and cell tower data of what direction and distance a device was from a cell tower at a particular time, and trying to tie all those things together to show the movements of two men who, although they had a lot of somewhat suspicious communications by text message that was available to the jury, there was no smoking gun by any means.
Right.
This was never a slam dunk case. The jury had to put together a lot of really minute circumstantial evidence and a lot of highly technical things that they had to trust were accurate, that they had to trust prosecution witnesses like go-to cell phone expert, New York State Police investigator Allison Regan, who was there for the entire trial, even though she only testified for a day and a half because her cross-examination was interminable. A woman who's an expert in this field, who's been doing it for years, who is being questioned by the defense as if she's a child. A little hint of the mansplaining going on from the defense to the female technical expert, which I found difficult to sit through at the time. And those are the kind of people who are really at the heart of making this case work, who are necessary to get a conviction. And none of that made it to air.
How do you begin to sum that up?
I'm not sure you do,
and I'm not easily served on a Friday night quote unquote news program. You don't.
And maybe it wasn't a great candidate for a Dateline episode.
Maybe 13 episode Netflix series, but definitely not.
Speaking of 13 episode Netflix series,
I lost 13 hours of my life last week watching Iron Fist.
Lost completely.
Really?
It's the worst thing Marvel Studios has done by a wide margin.
Go to AV Club and read the reviews. I haven't read the reviews yet because
I'll be interested to see what outside opinions, but this...
I mean, it's getting solid B's as far as grades.
It was aimless. The whole thing hinges on Kung Fu, and the Kung Fu is horrible.
And I don't know if you saw this just recently. Who's the lead?
Finn Jones
telling somebody in the media that he was basically given 15 minutes of choreography instruction before shooting those fight scenes, and that's why they sucked.
And the camera, the way they edit it, clearly shows that he sucks.
So, okay, my question is this the same studio that does Daredevil?
It's the same studio.
Not the same crew?
Not the same showrunner.
Okay, because Daredevil's fight scenes are amazing.
Exactly. And the cage stuff was very brutal, in your face, and physical.
Yeah. But not, I mean, it didn't have to be beautifully choreographed.
And you have expected, if you're familiar with the character of Iron Fist at all, it's Kung Fu.
Right.
So you're expected Into the Badlands.
I love Into the Badlands.
Or, at least in a post-John Wick world, you want that kind of thing. And it was... This was 1980s A-Team fighting.
Wow.
It was that bad in spots.
It's not just Kung Fu in a technical, cultural sense of what Kung Fu is. This is a comic that came out of the popularity of Kung Fu films in the 1970s. This is a character who should make us think of Bruce Lee more than anyone else.
And he's referred to as a living weapon. And
Who isn't a living weapon at this point?
In this series did you get that feeling at all.
Can we retire the living weapon trope? Everybody's a living weapon in anything.
In fact, am not a living weapon.
No, you're not.
I am in Arkham City on the leaderboards.
I may be a living couch. I don't know if that counts as anything useful in a crime fighting context.
I am a living sex bomb.
I can vouch for this. I have videos. But yeah, Iron Fist was awful. Don't watch it. It didn't even do anything to help the Defenders, which is the next big move for Marvel's Netflix empire.
So what happens going into the Defenders from a media criticism standpoint? How many people do we lose? You know, if I'm Marvel, can they take that hit and still have the Defenders be successful?
I think so, just based on the success of Daredevil and Jessica Jones. And Luke Cage will bring in a whole new swath of fans, because that was, even though I had my...
The blacks.
There we go, folks.
The hip.
Urban. I think the dog whistle is urban.
This is now the third podcast in a row where James accuses me of being racist because I did not like the Luke Cage series.
Hey, if the shoe fits, man. So getting away from the racism.
Yes.
I'm just upset you couldn't come up with anything better than if the shoe fits.
If the yellow blouse and green pants and tiara fit. When does Defenders come out in relation to the Punisher? Isn't the Punisher going to get his own series?
He is, but I think well after Defenders.
Okay, so we can't count on the Punisher to bring people back into the fold.
I don't believe so. They may sneak him in to the Defenders.
Oh, they will.
Yeah, I would hope so. I would make him a Defender.
I can't see him as part of the Defenders, but
I can't, because I have a long history reading him in the comics. But if you only know him from that Daredevil series, you're like, I want to see more of this guy.
yeah,
He was the highlight of season 2 of Daredevil.
yeah.
By far, yeah. Bernthal just nailed that role. And that's the thing that surprised me, is the casting has been so good in all their other series, and it was so bad in Iron Fist. It was a big miss just all the way around.
So none of the other Netflix Marvel shows are going to get another season before the Defenders, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
In fact, Jessica Jones, who would have been due for a season 2 by now, her season 2 got pushed back till after Defenders,
Which is a shame, because
it's a real shame.
that was the strongest of the 4. I haven't seen Iron Fist, so
Daredevil season 2 was great.
I love Jessica Jones. I mean, it was hard to watch sometimes, but I loved it.
Jessica Jones was great. Daredevil season 2 is better for me. Has more rewatchability, let's put it that way.
Okay.
But it's a nice palate cleanser after finishing that shit show Iron Fist. I saw Logan.
Oh.
This is it's easily top 3, one of the best comic book movies ever made. It's
Not just Marvel, not just Fox. Comic book movies.
It's fantastic. It's damn near perfect.
Which non-Marvel movies would be in that top 3?
The Dark Knight, for sure. I mean, that's a top 3.
Kick-Ass. Billy Pilgrim.
I would go
Scott
V
Pilgrim,
for,
not Billy Pilgrim.
Yeah.
I'd go V
Totally
for
different.
Vendetta. Would be in the top 3 because of the cultural impact, and just it's such a cool movie.
Hellboy.
Hated that movie.
Really hated V for Vendetta?
I really
Why do you hate Alan Moore? I mean, it was almost
for many reasons.
It was word for word from the comic.
As a man, I have dozens of reasons to hate Alan Moore. I don't know. I just didn't like any of the characters.
Okay, fair enough. But Logan, probably it's almost perfect.
Okay.
It's fantastic. And any
Is
gripe you
it
have with
hard sit? Because that's been the impression I've gotten from other reviews, is that it's
what they did was they tried to adapt Old Man Logan with Lone Wolf and Cub, with a couple other like really cool things out of the X books, and they did it perfectly. Like, it was so well done. Like, it has the Reavers.
Really?
It has the Reavers, man. And they did it convincingly.
Sold.
Yeah.
Take my money. Take all my money now.
It's just they didn't stay true to the Old Man Logan comic, because that one was a little out there.
Yeah.
But there were themes from it that they applied in other places, and it worked so well.
What I've heard from so many reviews, though, is that it's depressing. That it's down and then it's down again, and then they give you reason to think that something good is going to happen, and then they smack you down again.
No, the whole thing. I mean, after you learn who this young girl traveling with them is and what she's all about, where she came from.
Easy on the spoilers.
Exactly. To me, I just got a great sense of hope through the last half of the movie. And I thought James Mangold, the director, did a really good job of using that hope to offset all the horrible things that were going on around it. And it ends with hope, not the X-Men hope.
Hope Summers?
Nope, not that one.
Okay.
No, the idea of hope.
Okay. I'm convinced. I mean, I wanted to see it anyway. I was a little turned off by some of the reviews. Not that they were glowing, but at the same time left me with the impression that I was going to walk out, possibly on the edge of suicide.
No, not at all. And the exchanges between Hugh Jackman and Sir Patrick Stewart, phenomenal. Classic.
I love that you gave him his proper due.
Sir?
Yes.
Yes. Someday it'll be Sir Hugh Jackman.
You think?
I don't know if he can be knighted because he's an Aussie. Are
Right.
they still a thing, them in Britain? Probably not.
I don't know about...
He's still subject to the crown,
Okay. So he could be knighted.
as far as I know.
Okay.
I'm not up on the rules of...
Yeah.
Maybe he could be a page or a squire. So I hope none of our listeners, or none of our listeners use me as their pop culture spirit guide, because I'm usually at least a year behind the times. But I cannot get enough of Master of None, the Aziz Ansari sitcom. Do you call it a sitcom? I don't know what you call it.
It's a series. It's a ha-ha series.
But is it? I mean, I watched a couple episodes last night, enjoyed the hell out of it, and I don't think I laughed out loud once, but it's very good. So, I mean, is it a postmodern sitcom? I don't know what it is, but it's very funny, and if you haven't seen it, seek it out on Netflix.
I don't know that you can call things like that or 30 Rock or Kimmy Schmidt sitcoms, because they only adhere to the sitcom mold in that they're 22 minutes.
Right, right. There's no, it's not a traditional 3-camera, or, there's no laugh track, but it's kind of a slice of life. Have you seen it?
I've not. I'm really terrible about watching any television.
Why do you say it's television with such disdain? This isn't Two Broke Girls.
I wasn't saying it with disdain so much as just putting an exclamation point on the fact that I really don't watch television. I got a lot of YouTube creators that I like, that I watch regularly. That's most of my watching, and the rest of my screen time is really spent on games. So
it's people like you that are killing television.
Okay.
And me too. The only TV I've watched since I've purchased Horizon Zero Dawn is Iron Fist. That's it. I mean, the rest of my free time is spent on Horizon Zero Dawn, which I love with every more playthrough.
Well, we're looking at each other,
Okay.
waiting for somebody to say something. I think that's our...
James can edit that out. What are you doing cool this week or looking forward to this week?
I'm just going to binge on Master of None. I'm going to watch a little basketball. The NCAA tournament is wild and wacky as it is every year, so I can't wait to watch the Final Four next weekend. Going down to Tom Reed's office to protest the NEH and NEA funding cuts that are not in the budget because it isn't a real budget, but it's always fun to protest.
Will you be painting your chest again?
I may. I may be painting myself in Democrat blue.
James, how about you?
Well, I'm not going to be spending my time protesting a document that doesn't exist. So that's some of my time saved. Mostly going to be working. My editor above me is going to be on vacation this week, so I'm sort of helming the ship after all of 3 weeks as the assistant editor at the paper.
So no pants at work?
Extra pants, actually. I'm requiring everyone to wear 2 pairs at the same time.
And of course, we got the IndyCar IMSA doubleheader at Long Beach coming up, which As far as street races go, I like that one. Usually I don't like temporary circuits, but I really enjoy that.
Well, it sounds like we got a full week ahead of us.
Awesome, boys. Why don't we meet back here next Sunday when we have absolutely nothing to do and try to stay on topic?
Sounds like a plan.